Hello, scholars. Welcome to another history lesson. We are on lesson 10 today. We only have one more lesson left in this unit after today's lesson. So, what are we going to work on today? What are today's objectives? So, the things to take away from today's lesson. We will be introduced to the Netherlands' roles in exploration and colonization. And we will learn about 4 explorers' travels for the Netherlands. So let's get started. If you remember Portugal from the beginning of our unit, you will remember that it is a small country that had a large impact on exploration and colonization all around the world. Similarly, oh my goodness, the Netherlands had a large impact on the world as well, although it is also fairly small. The Netherlands is also known as Holland, and people from the Netherlands are called Dutch. So if you've heard of, right, if someone says the Dutch East India Company, right, that was a spice trade company set up by the Dutch, right, by the people from the Netherlands, from Holland. The Dutch were different from the English, Spanish, and French in one important way. They had a very specific goal. They wanted to make money. Period. End of story. Now, I'll give you a little bit more of the story than that, but before I flip to the next slide, take a look at the Netherlands on this map. You can see it there in red, right? So even a little bit smaller, it looks like than Portugal, but you can see the other 4 countries from whom we have studied their involvement in exploration and colonization during this unit. So, back to the Dutch. Their specific goal wanting to make money. Now, you might say, what's the difference? The other countries seemed to just be interested in money too. But don't forget, scholars, the Portuguese, English, Spanish, and French, when they arrived somewhere, right, they would say something like, we claim this land for England, or we claim this land for Spain. In doing this, the English, Spanish, Portuguese, and French were getting involved in hundreds of thousands of acres of land and taking on everything that came along with that land. There's a lot of things to take care of, to manage. Right? You may remember just a couple days ago when you were working with the study of France that they tried to set up a colony and failed, right? Because they couldn't get people to come there. So England, Spain, Portugal, and France took on a lot more when they were claiming these lands. The Netherlands didn't want to get involved quite in that same way. They wanted to make money, but they had some different ideas. Let me give you another example of this. So, European countries like England felt the need to control or fight with the people who already lived there. They felt the need to build colonies and bring people from their own country to live there. In the end, all of this colonization cost those Europeans money. So, looking at this map, scholars, the first map in green, that's the size of England itself in the time that we were studying this, in the time of our study, right? The 1400s, 1500s. And you can see it was 50,301 square miles. But at the height of Britain's empire, so the map that's in gray and kind of that pinkish salmon color, at that time, right, what Britain's empire was controlling and trying to manage was 13,700,000 square miles. Right? So that's a lot more to manage and a lot more money to be spending, controlling. So the Netherlands didn't want that same kind of involvement, that same kind of commitment, that same kind of financial burden. So instead, now take a look at this. The Dutch were not interested in trying to control large areas of land because they realized that they could make plenty of money by simply trading with the people who already lived in other parts of the world. So, why get control of them and need to stretch out what we can handle? Instead, they wanted to just establish trade in these other parts of the world. So, take a look at this picture of the world. It shows the lands and outposts that were at one time or another controlled by the Dutch. Study those green spots, like dark green, the light green, and those orange spots. And I want you to think for a moment, what do you notice? Hmm. Feeling a little stuck? That's okay. Let's keep going. As you hopefully could see, the Dutch tended to stick to the coasts and waterways. So look again at that map, scholars. Look at those green areas and those orange areas. Do you see how they're right along coasts, right by water? That's what the Dutch tended to do. They would stick to the coastline, to waterways, making it easy to get to for trade. The total area that they controlled is very small compared to the claims that these other European countries were making. In this way, they were able to trade all over the world without spending nearly as much time and money as trying to control other people. Pretty wise of them. Now, that's not to say that the Dutch were always using their justice when they were establishing their trading posts and taking over territories. The Dutch traders did actually also participate in the slave trade, and they did take over a large portion of Southeast Asia. So, just like the other European countries we've studied, they did not use their justice all of the time either. However, they did have a unique approach to exploration and colonization that explains why Dutch history pops up all over the world and sometimes even in some unexpected places. Let's hear about that exploring. Jan van Lixtoiten, who you can see in this picture, was a key part of the Dutch becoming so involved and so successful in the spice trade. So, Jan van Lixtoiten was an explorer who was also a very keen businessman. He looked for a northeastern route to the Spice Islands after hearing about the failed northwestern route. So, scholars, if you think for a moment about explorers who were thinking you could go north, around, up and around North America, right, north of what is Canada today, and they failed, Lixtoiten was thinking, what if you go northeast and go up north around Europe and Asia to get to the Spice Islands? Well, that didn't work either. When that didn't work, though, what Lixtoiten did was not give up. He instead decided to go to India by going around Africa, stopped there, spent a lot of time working in India, and gathered a lot of information related to the spice trade. That information would become very valuable to the Netherlands when they started sending out more ships, and they later set up their own trade company called the Dutch East India Trade Company. And later you'll hear about them setting up what's called the Dutch West Indies Trading Company. Keep that in the back of your mind. You'll hear about that in our next lesson. In their quest to keep finding new places along coastlines to make into trade centers, Dirk Hartog was sent to explore in 1616 and found Australia. Now remember, just like with our explorers finding North America and South America, there were already native people living there. So when we say he found Australia, what that means is he was the first European to find out that Australia was there. But keep in mind, there were other people already living there when he found Australia. Then, scholars, nearly 30 years later, Abel Tasman sailed in 1643 and he discovered the island that he named Tasmania near Australia. But he also sailed around Australia, proving that it was a giant island unconnected to another land. Wow. So be careful not to get these two mixed up. So Hartog found Australia, right? Landed in Australia, but Abel Tasman, right? Found the island named Tasmania, right? Tasman, Tasmania, and sailed all the way around Australia, proving that it was a giant island. So their explorations were connected to each other. A fourth and final explorer is Henry Hudson. So this explorer actually landed in what is now New York City here in the United States. In fact, that area was named New Netherland before it was called New York. And it remained under control of the Dutch people for 53 years, from 1614 to 1667. But this wasn't Henry Hudson's original plan. After hearing about explorers failing to find the Northwest Passage or the Northeast Passage, what Henry Hudson thought might work was simply to go north from the Netherlands, right up and over the North Pole to get to the other side of the Earth, to the Spice Islands. Well, you probably already all guessed his plan didn't work either. And when it didn't work, he turned his ship to the west. His ship was called Half Moon, and he ended up sailing to what is today New York City. He found a river there that was named the Hudson River, and he claimed that land for the Netherlands. He later sailed again on another ship and discovered an inland sea, a big bay, right, that is now named the Hudson Bay. So there's a Hudson River and a Hudson Bay named after Henry Hudson. During this second journey on his ship called Discovery, there was a mutiny. He and a few loyal crew members were placed overboard in a small boat and were never heard from again. So, scholars, that brings us to the end of this information about the Netherlands. Let's review what we learned about today. So, we were introduced to the Netherlands' roles in exploration and colonization. We heard that they weren't quite as interested in colonizing other parts of the world, but they were definitely interested in exploring and establishing trade routes. They kept their trade centers, right, very near coastlines and waterways, making it easy to get to for trade. We also learned about four explorers and their travels for the Netherlands. Right? We learned that Lixtoiten, right, did not find a northeast passage, but instead settled in India and then did a lot of research and work related to the spice trade, which leads to the Dutch really taking over the spice trade later and establishing what's called the Dutch East India Company and later the Dutch West India Company. The second and third explorers we talked about were Dirk Hartog, the one who found Australia, right? The first European to find Australia. And then about 30 ish years later, Abel Tasman, who sailed around Australia and proved it was a great big island and found a little island that is now named Tasmania after him. The fourth explorer we talked about thought you could go over the North Pole to get to the Spice Islands. When that didn't work, that explorer, Henry Hudson, ended up exploring the area that is today New York City and named the Hudson River that he found. So, quite a bit of information today. Your assignment is to open the attached Google form and answer the 5 questions about today's lesson. Remember, you can go back into the lesson, listen to information again, look at the slides again, use it as a way to find evidence to help you with your answers. And as always, remember to click submit at the bottom of the Google form. Scholars, thank you for joining me for information today about the Netherlands. We have one lesson to go in our study. Keep up the great work.